Many of us old fogies grew up being taught Columbus set out to prove the Earth was a globe. And some of the cartoons we grew up watching reflected that.
Round, lad, round, lad, round, lad, round.
Columbo, the world she's flat.
The world she's around.
She's flat.
Look, King, she's around like the apple.
She's flat like the pancake.
Posta fazoon. She's around, she's a firm, she's a fully packed. She's around like my head.
She's flat like your head.
A biscuit tortone.
Yeah. What's up, Docs?
I'm a disgust. Nobody believes in the world she's around.
She looks around to me, Doc.
Oh, boys, come here.
A Queen Isabella.
If you can prove the world is round, Chris, I'll give you my jewels.
A ravioli.
1492, when even the most learned of astronomers believed that the world was as flat as a pancake. Until one day, Christopher Columbus proved to the Queen that the world was round. Impressed by the demonstration, the Queen gave Columbus the fabulous crown jewels.
Thanks. Thanks, Queenie.
Came the day of departure. Columbus was prepared to face the dangers of the unknown sea, aided by his brave crew.
Inside, in Europe, the people were white-skinned. They had learned how to build houses and large sailing ships, but they still didn't know much about the rest of the world. In fact, most of them believed the Earth was flat. Then one day, a map maker named Christopher Columbus had an idea.
Do you know what? I think the world isn't flat at all. I think it's round like a ball.
Did you hear what he said? Did you hear what he said? He said that the world is round. Oh,
he's crazy. He's mad. I think the world isn't flat at all. I think it's round like a ball.
The world's as flat as the brim of your hat, and that is very plain.
I know that I'm right. Oh, I know that I'm right when I say that the world is round. Oh, I'm right. Oh, I'm right. My thinking is sound, and I'll prove the world's round. It won't take very long.
But it did take long, 7 long years, before Columbus could convince a king or a queen to let him try out his idea. Then Queen Isabella of Spain agreed to supply the ships and men for his trip.
I will discover a shortcut to India and bring back some of the great wealth I find there. And I can do it, for I know the world is round. And instead of going east to India, I shall sail west and reach India around the other way. It will be a shorter and cheaper way, for I'll do it all by sea.
Queen Isabella provided Columbus with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And on August 3rd, 1492, they set sail across the unknown Atlantic.
High on the foaming tide, over the ocean.
Yes, a mutiny. The captain thinks the world is around, see? But we all know it's a flat, right?
Of course it's flat.
Sure, I know the world is flat.
Well, so do I. Everybody knows that.
Good.
You see, my crew thinks the Earth is flat, but we know it's round.
Right? Yeah, right. Sure, it's round.
Of course it's round. Yeah.
What were the Flintstones doing talking to Columbus? It is more than evident here that this was part of a propaganda campaign trying to smear flat earthers and portray them as stupid cavemen. As many know, many scholars today claim Columbus never set out to prove that the earth was a globe, and that whole teaching is utterly false. So why were so many cartoons portraying this? Well, it is because a lot of schools were teaching that. Our textbooks drew from one particular source, Washington Irving's 4-volume series, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus, and years went by without anyone bothering to fact-check it. Lucas on our debate board once asked me why I don't refer to books very often. My answer is for this very reason. I see it as an appeal to laziness, protecting a claim by banking on the thought that my audience won't argue with it because it would take too much effort to go and find the book themselves. And when it comes to published peer-review articles, many of them charge money to read them, presenting more obstacles in the way of fact-checking. On that matter, I prefer to play with an open hand by presenting claims that are easy to see for yourself. As they say, a picture speaks 1,000 words, and with that being the case, I find visual demonstrations are far more valuable than mere written descriptions. With that, I have to roll my eyes with the kind of superiority people see in books. Oh, if it's published in a book, it makes it more likely to be true than video footage you can see for yourself. I don't think so. Anyway, back to Columbus. As I was saying, it was this whole appeal to laziness and referencing books and manuscripts that were not easily accessible that led to this whole Columbus catastrophe. I've got a link to that book in this video's description. Now let's have a peek for ourselves and see what it says about Columbus and the flat earth. Here's a passage about the kind of opposition Columbus faced, according to Washington Irving. Starting at the bottom of page 122 here. The passage cited from Lactantius to confute Columbus is in a strain of gross ridicule, unworthy of so grave a theologian. Is there anyone so foolish, he asks, as to believe that there are antipodes with their feet opposite to ours, people who walk with their heels upward and their heads hanging down? That there is a part of the world in which all things are topsy-turvy, where the trees grow with their branches downward, and where it rains, hails, and snows upward? The idea of the roundness of the earth, he adds, was the cause of inventing this fable of antipodes, with their heels in the air. For these philosophers, having once erred, go on with their absurdities, defending one with another. More grave objections were advanced on the authority of St. Augustine. He pronounces the doctrine of antipodes incompatible with the historical foundations of our faith, since to assert that there were inhabited lands on the opposite side of the globe would be to maintain that there were nations not descended from Adam, it being impossible for them to have passed the intervening ocean. This would be, therefore, to discredit the Bible, which expressly declares that all men are descended from one common parent. Such were the outlook for prejudices which Columbus had to encounter at the very outset of his conference, and which certainly relish more of the convent than the university. To his simplest proposition, the spherical form of the earth, were opposed figurative text of Scripture. They observed that in Psalms, the heavens are said to be extended like a hide, that is, according to commentators, the curtain or covering of a tent, which, among the ancient pastoral nations, was formed of the hides of animals, and that St. Paul in his epistle to the Hebrews compares the heavens to a tabernacle or tent, extended over the earth, which they thence inferred must be flat. Columbus, who was a devoutly religious man, found that he was in danger of being convicted, not merely of error, but of heterodoxy. Others, more versed in science, admitted the globular form of the Earth, and the possibility of an opposite and inhabitable hemisphere. But they brought up the chimera of the ancients, and maintained that it would be impossible to arrive there, in consequence of the insupportable heat of the torrid zone. Even granting this could be passed, they observed that the circumference of the Earth must be so great as to require at least 3 years to the voyage, and those who should undertake it must perish of hunger and thirst, from the impossibility of carrying provisions for so long a period. He was told, on the authority of Epicurus, that admitting the Earth to be spherical, it was only inhabitable in the northern hemisphere, and in that section only was canopied by the heavens, that the opposite half was a chaos, a gulf, or a mere waste of water. Not the least absurd objection advanced was that, should a ship even succeed in reaching in this way the extremity of India, she could never get back again, for the rotundity of the globe would present a kind of mountain, up which it would be impossible for her to set sail with the most favorable wind. I think it's kind of funny how they are more worried about sailing off the edge of a globe than they are about sailing off the edge of a flat Earth. I've got to say I'm pleasantly surprised by all of this. When I first picked up the book, I was fully expecting to find a bunch of humongous flat Earth misrepresentations, just like in the cartoons. But I don't see any of that. Irving's portrayal of the flat Earth mindset has actually been pretty good. Now I'm just curious what Columbus's response was to all of this. Let's take a look at that. It is but justice to add also that the replies of Columbus had great weight with many of his learned examiners. In answer to the scriptural objections, he submitted that the inspired writers were not speaking technically as cosmographers, but figuratively in language addressed to all comprehensions. The commentaries of the fathers he treated with deference as pious homilies, but not as philosophical propositions, which it was necessary either to admit or refute. The objections drawn from ancient philosophers he met boldly and upon equal terms, for he was deeply studied on all points of cosmography. He showed that the most illustrious of these sages believed both hemispheres to be inhabitable, though they mined that the torrid zone precluded communication, and he obviated conclusively that difficulty, for he had voyaged to St. George Lamina in Guinea, almost under the equinoctial line, and had found that region not merely traversable, but abounding in population, in fruits and pasturage. When Columbus took his stand before this learned body, he had appeared the plain and simple navigator, somewhat daunted, perhaps, by the greatness of his task and the august nature of his auditory. But he had a degree of religious feeling which gave him a confidence in the execution of what he conceived his great errand, and he was of an ardent temperament that became heated in action by its own generous fires. Las Casas and others of his contemporaries have spoken of his commanding person, his elevated demeanor, his air of authority, his kindling eye, and the persuasive intonations of his voice. How must they have given majesty and fierce to his words, as casting aside his maps and charts, and discarding for a time his practical and scientific lore, his visionary spirit took fire at the doctrinal objections of his opponents, and he met them upon their own ground, pouring forth those magnificent texts of Scripture and those mysterious predictions of the prophets, which, in his enthusiastic moments, he considered as types and enunciations of the sublime discovery which he proposed. Wow! Columbus's response here was really vague. The only attempt he described here was in just claiming the Bible was being figurative, and he makes no other efforts in making globe earth arguments. Essentially, from the way Irving makes it sound, Columbus primarily won people over by his heroic religious fervor, smooth talking, and charming mannerisms. On another note, I found it extremely thought-provoking to read this article by Yale University, which says Henricus Martellus, a German cartographer working in Florence in the late 15th century, produced a highly detailed map of the known world. According to experts, there is strong evidence that Christopher Columbus studied this map and that it influenced his thinking before his fateful voyage. Writings by Columbus's son Ferdinand indicate that the explorer had expected to find Japan where Martellus depicted it, and with the same orientation, far off the Asian coast, and with its main axis running north and south. No other surviving maps from the period show Japan with that configuration, says Van Duzer. In addition, the journal of one of Columbus's crew members, who believed the expedition was sailing along island chains in southern Asia, describes the region much as it is depicted in the Martellus map. Revealing the faded details provides a more complete picture of Columbus's perception of geography, notes a historian. If this represents Columbus's perception of geography, I don't know about you, but it looks to me like Columbus was a flat earther, because that looks like a flat earth map, with a great big ice wall around it and everything. I've got a link to that article from Yale University in this video's description so you can see it for yourself. As History.com says, during Columbus's time, educated people carefully studied knowledge passed down by the ancient Greeks. Thus, it's nearly impossible and completely implausible that rich Spaniards of the late 15th century thought Columbus would fall off the edge of a map. You can't sail off the edge of a map so long as there's an ice wall around it. That whole notion of people being afraid of sailing off the edge of the flat earth is just a part of the big globe earth propaganda campaign to misrepresent the flat earth as much as possible. Next, History.com speaks of Columbus's miscalculation concerning the Earth's circumference. Now some people might say, oh, that means Columbus was a globe earther. But please keep in mind, pancakes have circumferences as well. Just because something has a circumference doesn't automatically mean it is a ball. The word circumference simply means the outer boundary of something. And if you look at the Martellus map, it is missing all of the Americas. So yes, by the map, History.com is correct. Columbus mistakenly believed the outer boundary of the world was much smaller than it actually was. Now, without any kind of source documents indicating Columbus was a globe earther, I have to say I find it highly probable that Columbus has been a flat earther this entire time. Thank you for watching. This video is brought to you by the Flat Earth Institute of Science.